Hey everybody, Plushie here, and what a pleasant surprise that they decided to drop a brand new SSR out of nowhere to end this year with a bang. Now, no matter if you agree or disagree with this decision, because honestly, 6-day banner is a bit cruel for a debut banner, at the very least, they got people talking. So on the publicity side of things, this is a great success. So of course, today we're going to be talking about Phantasmoon, and unfortunately I don't have nearly as much time to test out the character before I get to make this hot take, because at least I have to have this out before the banner ends for it to make a little bit of sense. So, it's not going to be the most accurate thing ever, probably the most actually hot take video I've ever made, but hey, at least it'll be funny when we look back at this if I'm very wrong. But yeah, without further ado, let's get into today's hot take video on Phantasmoon. Phantasmoon is a SSR single target pretender. We've never really had a dedicated DPS in the SSR pretender slot, so this is the first one and it's pretty exciting. Looking at her base stats, her attack stat is actually really high. It's higher than some Berserkers and Avengers even, so it's really nice to have on a DPS, especially on a farmer. She has a base MP gain of 0.58% per hit on a 3-hit arts card, 5-hit quick card, and 5-hit extra attack. The arts card are just okay, but the quick and extra attacks are really good, and it's especially important that she has a good extra attack because she does have a couple of extra attack related skills, which we'll get into very soon. She is lawful good, so you can use that bond boosting CE for her that boosts her bond by 20%. She's also star attribute, so she doesn't get screwed by the attribute triangle. Her damage would always be a 1.0 times multiplier instead of 0.9 or 1.1. And other than that, I don't think she has any super notable traits, and overall pretty good base stats. Her first skill is a party-wide 30% MP battery, a party-wide 20% MP damage up for 3 turns, and a party-wide overcharge boost by 1 stage for 1 time 3 turns on a 7-turn cooldown. So finally, we got another DPS that has an AoE 30% MP battery. We've gotten a lot of good multi-core farmers this year, but most of them have 20% party-wide MP charges, but 30 is still very exclusive. I'm pretty sure we only have Koyan Dark and Tez who can do that as DPSs, so this automatically puts her, pretty high on the multi-core farmers list, especially considering the skill also buffs the entire party's MP damage for 3 turns. The overcharge can be particularly useful with certain multi-core mainstays like Lohi, whose MP's party-wide buff scales with overcharge, or someone like Tonaliko, who needs extra overcharge stages to activate her skill 3 within 3 turns. Now, the skill is on a relatively long 7-turn cooldown, so if you really want to single core buster loop with her for some reason, you might need the help of a Pen 5, but most of the times you aren't going to be using her for that, so it doesn't really matter in my opinion. Her second skill is a 30% Buster and Arts double buff, and it also turns her extra attack into an AoE attack for 3 turns, and it works the same as Aoko or Yu Olga Marie's NPC, where its effectiveness on each individual targets when it's in AoE mode is cut in half. So all of its MP gains, its star gen, and its damage are cut in half when considering individual targets to compensate for the fact that it does AoE damage. But don't worry, the skill also comes with a 100% extra attack effectiveness up. This buff is essentially the same type of buff as a color buff, so Buster, Quick, and Arts up, and it buffs all of the card's effectiveness, so including Star Gen, MP Gen, and damage. So this is trying to cancel out the demerit of the extra attack when it's in AoE mode on individual targets. And finally, this is also a 20% flat MP battery. All of this is on a 6-turn cooldown. The 30% Buster and Arts double buff is pretty nice. The Buster buff buffs her MP damage and her Buster card damage, of course, but the Arts buff also helps her with her MP gain since she has 2 Arts cards and their base gain are not that impressive to begin with. The 20% MP flat charge is really nice that you don't need to use a lore for it to be a 20 charge, but also it makes her have the same MP charge spread as Tez, because now she has essentially self 50 MP charge and 30 MP charge for her teammates, and it's actually more flexible because you can use the 30 charge and the 20 charge for herself separately. So it's really nice for her multi-core farming as well. The extra attack is arguably the most interesting part about this skill. As I mentioned before, the extra attack effectiveness up cancels out the demerit on each individual target when this is in AoE mode. There are a couple of more nuances on AoE extra attacks, such as it doesn't count as the same chain, it counts as like a separate attack. So if you do like a Brave chain with Phantasmoon, but the first 3 cards already killed the enemy, the extra attack would not come out to, you know, do the overkill bonus, for example, which is something that annoyed me with Alco, but you know, that's just how AoE attacks work at this point. We're pretty familiar with that concept. So yeah, really interesting skill, very decent in terms of the MP charge and the double buff at the very least, and the extra attack gimmick is really fun. Her third skill is a 15 star bomb, and it's also a targetable 5000% star absorb buff for 3 turns and 15 star per turn effect for 3 turns, and this also buffs the entire party's attack up by 20% and crit up by 30%, and all of it is only on a 6-turn cooldown. So this is a really strong crit based skill. The 15 star bomb and the 15 star per turn combo is super nice. It means that this skill can give you immediate stars to crit with and sustainable stars to crit with for the following 3 turns. The star absorb up does guarantee your DPS, basically all of the stars, and it even works on low star weight classes like Berserkers, so she can kind of be a crit support, especially in farming if you want to rely on like crit damage a little bit. A lot of times you actually want that on your Berserker because they have, you know, better damage and triple buster decks, and this will allow even just 15 stars to basically all go to your Berserker, so it's really good. I also like the detail of the 15 star per turn effect being targetable as well, so if Phantasmoon is about to die, she can at least maintain part of her value from this skill. The party-wide 20% attack up feeds even further into her multi-core farmer role, so if we tally up all of her party-wide buffs, it's 30% MP charge, 20% MP damage up, 20% attack up, and overcharge boost by 1 stage, so she has a lot of buffs for the entire party, and that's super nice. The crit up, I would have preferred it if it was targetable and 50%, because that will allow herself to be a better crit DPS, but the party-wide 30% crit is not too bad, even if it's just for herself, and if you want to rely on multiple servants on your party to do crit damage, it's also quite decent, even though it's kind of anti-synergy with the star absorb up, where you are basically only focusing on one target for their crits. But overall, it's a really strong skill. Like, once again, just for challenge quests, if you use it on herself, it's a great DPS crit skill that is bread and butter. It has everything you want in a crit skill. It has crit steroids, it has attack up, it has star immediately, has star sustain, and it has of course star absorb up. So for passives, she has magic resistance B, which is really nice. 17.5% passive debuff resist is super nice to have against, you know, anything. Item construction A increases her debuff success rate, which is kind of useless. She only has 1 debuff on her MP. For someone who is this light on debuffs in terms of her kit, this basically feels like nothing. She has a fake territory creation that actually does nothing, and she also has independent action A, which increases her crit damage by 10%, which is whatever. And most importantly, she has incarnation of the Holy Knight EX, which is a alternative version of the original Arcueid's passive, where she gets a rainbow buff and 5 stars per turn, but this time not on Millennium Castle, but on Darkness Battlefield. So interestingly, if you pair her with Lohi, who is the other most recent SSR who can give the entire party Dark Field for 5 turns, this actually is pretty nice for multi-core farming. So I don't know if it was intentional, but hey, that's pretty funny. And finally, her MP is a single target 5-hit Buster MP that seals the enemy's MP for a single turn, as well as increases her own extra attack effectiveness by 50% for a single turn as well. And the overcharge is anti-evil from 150% to 200%. It charges her own MP from 20% to 40%, as well as charges her living human allies MP from 20% to 40% as well. So this is a pretty good MP, honestly. MP seal is really nice against boss fights. The extra attack effectiveness up is basically trying to play into her second skill, so you know, her extra attack is even better in AoE mode. However, I have to warn you though, the effectiveness up is the same type of buff as the effectiveness up from her second skill, so realistically, if you're comparing her second skill's activation with or without the MP, it would only be like a 25% difference in terms of effectiveness, which is still like decently large, but it's not going to be the full 50%. Like, you're most likely not going to feel it if you have the second skill active. However, this is an MP effect, so even when the second skill is not active, this does boost her extra attack damage in general, so it's like an okay bonus effect. The overcharge effect is the most important one because there are 3 effects and they're all pretty relevant in farming. Anti-evil is very good coverage, mostly for servants obviously, but there are also non-servant evil enemies, so in general it's just a really good MP for damage. The self MP recharge is also super nice because she's a buster MP servant, so usually her MP would not refund any MP, so having some form of recharge does allow her to spam this a little bit easier and also potentially use this MP more than once in a multi-core setup. And finally, this also charges living human allies just like her original form, and there aren't that many living human servants, to be honest, and there are even less ones that are like super relevant in my opinion. Probably some of the highlights I will pick out are Rhaenys for challenge quests, because Rhaenys' MP is really good in challenge quests. For farming, the most obvious one is Tez, who is a really good multi-core farmer. You can also argue maybe Hibiki Shikagi, who is a multi-core farmer that buffs Buster, but then their alter ego. Usually you won't put alter egos and pretenders in the same team because, you know, they cannot cover each other's advantages, right? And also maybe Sojiro, because Sojiro is also common in multi-core farming, but he's a single target, so he's usually comboing with other AoEs instead of another single target. I guess Durga is a good option as well because Durga also gives the party overcharge, so this can combo with Phantasmoon's self party overcharge, but you know, it depends on the node basically, so not that significant, but also I think the MP is already good enough even without this living human charge effect. It's kind of just like a callback to the original form, I'd say. So yeah, good MP. As a farmer, Phantasmoon is very clearly a top tier in terms of multi-core farming. She just has everything you can ask for from a character occupying this role. Party-wide 30 MP battery, that alone should justify her to be top 3 out of all single target multi-core farmers, simply because that is such a rare thing to have without strings attached, even just amongst the entire SSR roster. If we're looking at DPSs that has party-wide 30 MP charge that isn't conditional, we basically only have Koyan Dark and Tezcatli Polka. If you want to count OG Arcueid, yes, but she is forced to use her MP first and set the field to Millennium Castle in order to do something like this. We also have single target units like Don Quixote after his buff that can technically charge the other party members by 30, but of course he doesn't charge himself, so it's very hard for him to use his MP actually. And we don't actually have another single target that has something like this. And on top of charging herself with the party battery as well, she also charges herself with an additional 20% MP battery. She essentially has the same battery number as Tez, and it's even more flexible because the 20% MP battery can be saved if you want to have her append to maxed and a 50 MP starting charge CE, and then used on a following turn to use her MP again more easily when combined with her MP's recharge effect as well as other people's MP charge effects. And also, she has anti-evil, really good anti-trade coverage, and of course, helped by her own overcharge boost as well. And her party-wide buffs are just a really good combination. You have 20% attack up, 20% MP damage up, and overcharge boosts, which are all generally going to be very useful for MP damage. And even if you want to include card damage into your farming comp, because maybe you don't have the highest MP levels on your DPSs, then her star per turn, star bomb, and party-wide critical damage up all helps with that as well. So Phantasmoon just has such a well-rounded kit for support, tagged onto a very competent single target DPS with a very good coverage in anti-trade. We really don't have that in the single target category for multi-core farmers. We have some units like this in AoE, like we just got Lohi for example. We also have Tonalico, Koyan Dark, Tezcatli Polka, and I feel like this is just a sort of archetype that is a lot more common in AoEs, while in terms of single target multi-core farmers, you're either using single target arts to spam their MP, and your entire team is built around supporting that art single target like Draco or Summer Castoria, or you're splashing in a single target who, you know, doesn't need a lot of external help to do big damage like Kintoki, but at the same time he doesn't really help the entire party at all. Phantasmoon is like the first ever single target multi-core farmer that I feel like deserves the top tier label, who is also more supportive based rather than selfish. The only other unit that I genuinely think comes close to what she's able to provide for a multi-core DPS as a single target is Abigail. Abigail is a servant that I feel like a lot of people are sleeping on for some reason, maybe because her initial iteration is really bad, but after her 2 recent buffs, she's actually got a lot of the good traits that I praised about Phantasmoon. First and foremost, she has a 30% MP battery and a 20% MP battery, so her self-charge battery numbers are the exact same as Phantasmoon. She also has a party-wide 10% battery at the end of each turn slow charge, so essentially a party-wide 20% MP battery, albeit a little bit less flexible. This also means that Abigail has 20 extra charge for her own MP, just like Phantasmoon if she aims to MP multiple times in a single run. Abigail, of course, also has decent party-wide buffs, mainly the 30% party-wide MP damage up, but also a 20% defense down on all enemies. It's not carryover like Phantasmoon's attack up, but it's semi-competitive. And finally, Abigail's biggest edge in this competition is her massive 100% power mod against terrorized enemies, which of course she can apply the terror herself, so she has essentially universal anti-terror 100% for a single turn. This also affects her face cards, so if you want to use her face cards, even though she has a really bad deck, it's gonna do massive damage as well. With all that praise sung for Abigail, unfortunately, I still have to say she's not on the same league as Phantasmoon. Phantasmoon's party-wide 30 charge just beats her party-wide slow charge by so much, it's not even close. Phantasmoon also has just better party-wide buffs in general. The attack up being able to carry over is way better than the defense down. Phantasmoon also has critical support while Abigail does not, and if Abigail chooses to use her MP more than once in a single run, then the other MP would do piss poor damage because she no longer has the power mod activated. As you can see here, this is her damage without the power mod. Absolutely pathetic, right? So you can obviously mention other examples such as Tutankhamun, but like his party-wide buff and charge is just not even close to what Phantasmoon is able to give, only 20% for each. And you know, someone like Maeve might be really good, but she doesn't have any self batteries, and also her buffs are like gender specific. So there are other single target multi-core farmers that buffs the party. I'm not saying they don't exist, but I'm just saying Phantasmoon is on a different level, and it's not condition based either. Her pretender class can be a good thing or a bad thing. The bad thing about it is obviously if you want her to farm absolutely everything, it's very hard to brute force through doing only half damage to cavalries, especially in farming, even if you have her at like 120 MP5. But on the flip side, that 1.5 times extra damage in terms of class advantage is super helpful. Like even if you take a super high damaging neutral damage dealer, when you compare it to like a mediocre damage dealer who has a 1.5 times class advantage, the damage is going to be close, and most of the time the 1.5 times guy would still beat the neutral. That's why berserkers are so broken in farming. So give or take, I suppose, in terms of her class. When talking about her kit earlier, I already brought up the 2 most significant synergies with the 2 top tier multi-core farmers. Lohi, because Lohi can put Darkness Field to trigger her passive and give her 20% more buster, as well as her overcharge helps Lohi buff the entire party's damage. And the overcharge also enables Tonaliko's skill 3 to activate earlier. But of course, that's not the only combos that you can use with Phantasmoon. The overcharge is very useful in almost every situation. The MP at the very least will probably do some kind of anti-trait damage, or it gives it better ramp up, like the MP damage up before damage stuff. So overcharge is almost always useful, more or less, for this kind of application. One thing to note though, single target multi-core farmers are usually used more sparingly than AoEs, because if you use like 2 of them, it's very difficult to guarantee a farming node to have 2 one enemy waves. For AoEs, if you are facing off against like a low HP node especially, you can brute force 1 enemy waves with AoEs still. Even if you need to use like face cards sometimes, it's still doable. But on the other hand, it's impossible to do multiple enemy waves with a single target, even though on paper Double Phantasmoon works very well. The overcharge helps each other, and their MP battery spread is the exact same as Tez, so they would just be the single target version of double Tez, but in reality, that's not going to be nearly as applicable as double Tez. That's actually a great segue to bring into the final discussion about Phantasmoon's farming, which is her extra attack, because her extra attack technically gives her access to doing AoE damage as a single target servant, but it's just not really worth it. If you don't build a team around it, it's way too inconsistent because you need specifically a Brave Chain to activate that AoE attack. And if you brute force to build around it, either with BBCL, which basically has no buffs for your DPS, or if you build it another way with Ruler Artoria, another buffer plus Hakuno, then it's also not consistent, right? Extra attack is just such a difficult card type to buff simply because it cannot crit, and it also is not belonging to any card type, so the only kind of buffs that you can buff it with is attack ups and power mods. And power mods are usually specific traits, or during events, so she might perform very well during events with her extra attack, but outside of this event, it's puny damage. One of the videos I made recently demonstrates that, and even when I tried to get a same color Brave Chain on the last wave, because if you don't know, extra attack scaling is increased if you have a same color Brave Chain as opposed to a normal Brave Chain, so that's a lot of damage. There's also a Buster Brave Chain, so you even have the Buster card leading effect, and even with all that, killing a normal story-free quest is already a little bit shaky, so you know how bad it will be when you're trying to do an event 90 plus or even 90 plus plus, right? So unfortunately, it's not really useful, but I think it's completely fine. She already has so many good things to go for in her farming that she doesn't really need to rely on this anyways. In terms of challenge quest performance, I really don't have the most time to test her out, but from my limited amount of testing, I really like her third skill, right? Her third skill, despite being a party-wide buff and having lower numbers to herself, is still a bread and butter crit skill that has everything you want for crit DPS. Star immediately, star per turn, attack up, crit up, and star absorb, and only on a 6-turn cooldown, so still really solid. But her other skills, not so much. I think her first skill is very good if you pair her with some of the highest tier supports that you would naturally use with her, like Merlin, Constantine, Castoria. All of these are units that really easily pair with Phantasmoon, and Phantasmoon's first skill is super good for all of these support characters, because Overcharge usually helps to support buff you more, or like Castoria, defend you more, and the MP charge helps them get their MP easier, right? So the ability to help these broken supports support her better is really valuable, despite the skill itself not being super good on herself. But on the flip side, if you don't have a lot of these good supports, you're just trying to have one unit carry you through a lot of content, then she's obviously not going to be great. All of her skills are starting to feel very lackluster. Her second skill is also pretty lackluster if you ignore the extra attack being AoE effect. And unfortunately, most of the times that you're going to be bringing her against a boss, you will be facing off against one enemy. And the extra attack being AoE is completely useless. I can potentially see this be useful in circumstances such as if there's like a main boss, but he also spawns like a bunch of trash mobs that you have to kill off, then this could be useful. But realistically, the extra attack just doesn't do real meaningful damage, and also it's a little bit too inconsistent to trigger because you're not always going to have access to your Brave Chain. So it's more of a flashy gimmick than something actually useful. Her MP though, I really like for boss killing because anti-evil is good coverage, and it also skills with overcharge, so you have the potential to push that damage even further with just, you know, her own overcharge and other people, of course. And also the MP seal is nice. I know she isn't arts, so her MP isn't like infinitely spammable, but at least it has like a flat recharge that kind of helps her spam it. And alter egos are traditionally 3-bar charge enemies, so MP seal effects on a class that counters alter egos is pretty nice to have. And overall, I just think she's not too crazy as a boss killer. She doesn't have a lot of stuff that other dedicated boss killers has, but it's fine because she's a, you know, supposed to be a farmer, but she can also do very well if you only need her MP damage against evil. In conclusion, I think Phantasmoon is probably the best party buffing single target DPS in the game, so that obviously puts her very high up in the multi-core farming tier list. The only thing that's holding her from being basically universal is her Pretender class, since she can farm against Cavalries, but at the same time, this allows you to not have to pull her at too high of an MP level in order to do decent damage. And of course, even though she's not as impressive as some monsters we got this year in terms of boss killing, she still functions fine as long as you have like a decent amount of good supports that works with her. And overall, she's going to be used very often, I feel, in a lot of future content, just because boss fights are like one and done as opposed to farming. So she's pretty valuable. If you're someone who is willing to, roll for characters like Tez and Koyan Dark just for multi-core farming purposes, then you definitely don't want to miss this one, because this one is even more exclusive in some ways, in my opinion. Anyways, hope you guys enjoyed the video. It's a bit messy, but hope it's still entertaining. Happy holidays, and I'll see you guys in the next one.